My brother screamed that I ruined Christmas right in the middle of dinner, making everyone stare at me like I had burned down the tree. 5 minutes later, my cheek burned from my stepmother's slap, while Dad just stared at his cold turkey. What they did not know was that I had already installed cameras, frozen the bank accounts, and turned our holiday meal into a trap with a lawyer and police officer waiting in the wings. My name is Emery Dalton, and for the last 18 months, I have lived in a house that smells of salt spray, old cedar, and the lingering ghost of my mother's lavender detergent. If you listened to my brother, Ethan, you would think I was a squatter, a failure of a millennial who retreated to the safety of the nest because the real world was too sharp for my soft skin. He liked to tell people I was finding myself, a phrase he used with a distinct curl of the lip that suggested I was actually just losing his inheritance. The truth was far less dramatic and far more exhausting. I was 33 years old. I had a portfolio full of user experience design work from my 5 years in Austin, Texas, where I had made a very comfortable salary. I had a savings account that I had built with obsessive discipline, and an investment portfolio that, while not as aggressive as Ethan's, was solid. I did not come back to Harbor Ridge, Maine, because I needed a roof over my head. I came back because my mother died of a massive stroke on a Tuesday morning, and my father, Charles Dalton, forgot how to breathe without her. Harbor Ridge was beautiful in the way that only coastal Maine could be. Stark, gray, and fiercely enduring. The house was a sprawling, shingled structure that sat on a bluff overlooking the Atlantic. It had belonged to my mother's parents, and she had loved every drafty corner of it. It was the only place on earth where I felt my lungs fully expand, but lately, the air inside felt heavy, compressed by the weight of grief and the invisible, suffocating pressure of my siblings' judgment. My father was nearly 70. He had been a high school history teacher for 40 years, a man who could once recite the Gettysburg Address from memory and debate the nuances of the Reconstruction era over dinner. He was gentle, slightly conservative in his habits, but liberal in his kindness. When Mom died, something in his internal architecture collapsed. He did not just grieve, he diminished. He stopped eating unless I put the plate in front of him. He stopped paying bills because he assumed Mom had handled them. He sat in his leather armchair by the window, staring at the gray horizon, waiting for a car that would never pull into the driveway again. I left Austin 2 weeks after the funeral. I packed my life into a moving truck, broke my lease, and set up a workspace in the corner of the sunroom. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for praise. I just did what had to be done. Ethan saw it differently. Ethan was 41, a senior investment manager at Crestline Capital Partners in Chicago. He wore suits that cost more than my first car and spoke in a language of assets, liabilities, and leverage. To Ethan, every human interaction was a transaction, and he was convinced I was on the winning side of a deal he had not authorized. He rarely visited. The trip from Chicago was too long, he said, and his schedule was too demanding, but he called. He called constantly, his voice booming through the speakerphone, demanding updates on Dad's health in the same tone he probably used to demand quarterly reports. Then there was Lauren. She was 38, a pharmacist at a large hospital in Denver. She was closer to Ethan than to me, both in age and in temperament. Lauren was practical to a fault, the kind of person who solved emotional problems with flowcharts. She believed she was the rational one, the medical expert of the family. She agreed with Ethan that I was too sensitive, that I was coddling Dad, and, most hurtfully, that I was taking advantage of the situation to live rent-free in a prime piece of real estate. I remember a specific phone call from last month. I was in the kitchen, peeling carrots for a stew because soft foods were easier for Dad to digest lately. The phone rang, and Ethan's name flashed on the screen. When I answered, he skipped the greeting. He asked if I had called the plumber yet for the upstairs bathroom. I told him I had, and that it was $200 for the fix. Ethan sighed, a loud, static-filled sound. He asked if I paid for it, or if I used Dad's card. I told him I used Dad's card because it was Dad's house. Ethan paused, and the silence was heavy. He told me that I was living there too. So technically, I should be contributing to the maintenance. He said it must be nice to have zero overhead while the rest of them were paying mortgages and raising families. I gripped the peeler so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream that I was paying with my time, my career, and my sanity. I wanted to tell him that while he was closing deals in Chicago, I was the one waking up at 3 a.m. because Dad had a nightmare. I was the one driving 40 minutes to the pharmacy in the snow. But I didn't. I just said that I would cover the next bill. I always swallowed the anger. It was easier to swallow it than to choke on the fight. My only lifeline in this sea of passive aggression was Uncle Mark. Mark was Dad's younger brother, a retired carpenter living in Boston. He was the complete opposite of my father in many ways, rougher around the edges, louder, and significantly less formal, but he loved his brother, and he saw me. He drove up every other weekend, his truck loaded with donuts from a bakery in the North End or fresh coffee beans. Mark would sit on the back porch with me while Dad napped. He would watch the waves crash against the rocks and tell me that I was doing a good job. He told me to ignore Ethan and Lauren. He said they were guilty, and guilt makes people ugly. He reminded me that they were not here wiping the counters or sorting the mail. He validated my existence in a way that kept me from packing my bags and running back to Texas. My daily life was a loop of repetitive, quiet service. I woke up every morning at 6 o'clock. The house was always cold in the morning, the kind of damp chill that settled into your bones. I would go down to the kitchen, start the coffee, and begin the breakfast prep. Dad needed a low-sodium diet for his blood pressure, so I made oatmeal with fresh fruit, avoiding the bacon and sausages he used to love. By 7:30, I would wake him up. Some days, he was already awake, staring at the ceiling. Other days, he was in a deep, heavy sleep that terrified me for a split second until I saw his chest rise. I would help him sit up, remind him what day it was, and guide him to the bathroom. I managed his medication with the precision of a nurse. There was the beta blocker, the statin, and a mild antidepressant the doctor had prescribed 6 months ago. I organized them in a plastic container marked with the days of the week. Once Dad was settled in his chair with the newspaper, which he read less and less, I would open my laptop. I had managed to keep a few freelance clients from my time in Austin. I designed app interfaces and websites, working in 2-hour bursts between Dad's needs. It was not the career trajectory I had planned. I was supposed to be a lead designer by now, managing a team. Instead, I was managing doctor appointments and grocery lists, but the income from the freelance work was enough to cover my personal expenses and add to my savings. I paid for my own food. I paid for my own gas. I even paid a portion of the internet bill. I was not a leech. But the narrative Ethan and Lauren were spinning was powerful. It was insidious. They did not just say these things to me, they said them to Dad. I began to notice the change in Dad's demeanor after his weekly scheduled calls with Ethan. Dad would come out of his study looking troubled, his brow furrowed in that way he used to get when a student failed a test. He would ask me strange questions. He would ask if I was happy here. He would ask if I was looking for a full-time job. Once, he asked if I was keeping track of the grocery receipts. When I asked him why, he mumbled that Ethan thought it was good practice to be organized. It broke my heart. Ethan was planting seeds of doubt in a mind that was already struggling to hold on to reality. He was making Dad feel like he needed to protect himself from me, his own daughter, the one washing his clothes and holding his hand when the grief hit him like a wave. My desire was simple, almost painfully so. I did not want the house. I did not want the money. I wanted my father to live out his remaining years in peace, in the home where he had been happiest. I wanted him to smell the ocean and feel the safety of these walls until the very end. And for myself, I just wanted to transition back into my career slowly, perhaps working remotely permanently, proving that I could be both a dutiful daughter and a successful professional. I had no grand ambition to inherit the earth. I just wanted to keep my father's world from falling apart. But the foundation was cracking, and it was not just because of my siblings. It started with the little things. Dad had always been absent-minded in a professorial way, losing his reading glasses or forgetting where he put his pen. But this was different. Lately, he complained of a bone-deep fatigue that sleep did not cure. He would sit at the breakfast table, the spoon hovering halfway to his mouth, and just stare at the wall for 5 minutes. When I called his name, he would startle, as if waking from a dream. Last Tuesday, I found him standing in the hallway, looking at the framed photographs of Mom. He asked me when she was coming back from the store. I froze. It had been 18 months. I gently reminded him that Mom was gone. He blinked, and the confusion cleared, replaced by a terrible, crushing sorrow. He apologized. He said he was just tired. He said his head felt foggy, like it was stuffed with cotton. I told myself it was grief. I told myself it was age. I told myself it was the side effect of the beta blockers. But deep down, in the pit of my stomach, something felt wrong. It felt like the gears of a clock slipping, missing a tooth, spinning out of rhythm. And while I was worrying about his mind, I did not realize that the real threat was not internal. It was coming from the outside, riding on the waves of false concern and calculated greed, waiting for the perfect moment to crash through our front door. The winter was coming to Maine. The days were getting shorter, the light dying out by 4 in the afternoon. The wind rattled the window panes, demanding entry. I tightened my cardigan around myself and went back to work, typing lines of code while my father slept in the next room, neither of us knowing that this was the quietest the house would ever be again. The storm was gathering, but it wasn't the weather I needed to fear. It was the people who claimed to love us the most. The shift began in October. Dad was heading out to get the mail, and in a moment of inattention, his foot slipped on the wet steps of the back porch. He had been favoring his right knee for years, a relic of his college football days, but the fall tore something essential. The surgery was routine, but the recovery was not. His doctor prescribed several weeks of physical therapy at a rehabilitation center in Portland, about a half-hour drive away. This was how Sabrina Cole walked into our lives. She was, I had to admit, exactly what he needed at first. Sabrina was 45 years old, 15 years younger than my mother would have been, and she vibrated with a kind of high-energy confidence that the house had lacked since Mom died. She was a physical therapist, and she was assigned to Dad's case. He came home from his first session not just talking about the stretches, but about her. He told me she had a laugh that could fill a room. He said she had told him a funny story about her first car, and he had laughed, actually laughed. It was a sound I had not heard in almost 2 years, and it was like water in a desert. I was grateful. At first, I was genuinely, deeply grateful. He started taking more care with his appearance on the days he had his appointments. He ironed his own shirt, a task I had taken over. He seemed lighter, more engaged, and less lost in the fog of his grief. When I mentioned this bright spot to Ethan during our next obligatory phone call, his reaction was odd. I had expected a non-committal, "Oh, good." Instead, he was unusually enthusiastic. He had asked me to repeat her name, Sabrina Cole. He had asked if she was attractive. I told him I had no idea. I had not met her. He had laughed, a short, sharp sound that was nothing like Dad's warm chuckle. He had said that it was great. He said that Dad needed someone to look after him, and it was about time. There was a calculating edge to his voice, a hint of opportunity that I registered but could not place. At the time, I just dismissed it as Ethan being Ethan, always seeing the angle, always one step ahead in a game I did not know we were playing. Dad's therapy sessions ended, but Sabrina's presence in our lives did not. She began to appear at the house. The first time, she brought a key lime pie, claiming it was her grandmother's recipe. Dad was delighted, ushering her in, offering her coffee. She stayed for an hour, and the entire time, Dad was animated, telling her stories about his teaching days. A week later, she brought a lasagna. She insisted on staying to help serve it. That dinner lasted 3 hours. Sabrina was charming, asking me polite, if superficial, questions about my design work, but her real focus was on Dad. She made him feel interesting. She made him feel seen as a man, not just as a widower or a patient. Dad bloomed under the attention. He started buying flowers, bouquets of bright, loud lilies and carnations, nothing like the simple daisies Mom had preferred, and setting them on the dining table. He bought a new bottle of cologne. The whispers started in town. When I picked up Dad's prescriptions, the pharmacist, Mrs. Gable, gave me a pitying look and asked how I was holding up with the new arrangement. The first real flicker of unease I felt was not about her relationship with Dad, but her relationship with the house. During that second visit, the one with the lasagna, I watched her. While Dad was in the kitchen fetching a bottle of wine, Sabrina stood in the living room, her back to me. She ran her hand, palm flat, along the dark wood of the fireplace mantel, a piece my grandfather had carved by hand. She touched the frame of the bay window, looking out not at the crashing waves, but at the expanse of the lawn. She turned to me, her smile bright and sudden. She asked me if I knew how much the property values in Harbor Ridge had shot up. She said the market was hot, hotter than it had been in 30 years. She said an old house like this, right on the water, must have amazing bones. She said it must be worth a fortune. I mumbled something about it being Mom's family home and went to help Dad with the wine. Then Ethan started visiting, in person. This was a change so abrupt, it felt like a shift in the tectonic plates of our family. He had not been home for more than 24 hours at a time since the funeral. Suddenly, he was flying in from Chicago for the weekend. He claimed it was to check on Dad's recovery, but he arrived that first Friday, and Sabrina was already there, as if by arrangement. The three of them, Dad, Ethan, and Sabrina, sat at the kitchen table, laughing like old friends. Ethan, who had never shown an ounce of interest in Dad's day-to-day life, was suddenly hanging on Sabrina's every word. The next day, I came downstairs to find Ethan and Dad in the study with the door closed. This was not unusual. Ethan often wanted to review the finances with him, but when I brought in a tray with coffee, I heard Ethan stop mid-sentence. I opened the door without knocking, a habit from when it was just me and Dad, and both of them startled. Ethan slammed his laptop shut. Dad, who had been looking at a stack of papers, quickly flipped them over. I had asked if everything was okay. Ethan stood up, his smile tight and condescending. He said they were just handling some family business, and he would appreciate some privacy. Dad looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. As I backed out of the room, I noticed the letterhead on the overturned papers. It was not from Ethan's firm, Crestline Capital Partners. It was from Northbridge Legal Group. I felt a cold prickle of anxiety. I called Lauren that night, needing an ally. I told her about Sabrina, about Ethan, about the closed-door meetings. Lauren sighed, the sound of a very busy person being interrupted. She told me I was being dramatic. She said I was probably just jealous that Dad was finally listening to someone else for a change. She said Sabrina sounded like a godsend, and that I should be grateful someone else was helping carry the load. She told me to stop looking for trouble, and to just let Dad be happy. She had a way of making me feel small and irrational, of reducing my genuine fear to petty jealousy. The final blow came 3 weeks later. It was a Tuesday, exactly 2.5 months after Dad's surgery. He called me into the living room. Sabrina was sitting beside him on the sofa, her hand resting on his knee. Dad was blushing. He told me, his voice stammering slightly, that Sabrina had made him happier than he had been in a very long time, and that they were getting married. I just stared. I felt the air leave my body. 2.5 months. I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask him if he had lost his mind. I wanted to demand to know what he knew about this woman who had gone from therapist to fiancé in 10 weeks. But I saw the look on his face. He was not just happy. He was terrified. He was terrified I would say no, that I would disapprove, that I would spoil this one, bright thing. And I saw Sabrina's eyes. Her smile was wide, but her eyes were fixed on me, sharp and challenging. She was daring me to object. So I said nothing. I swallowed the acid in my throat, and I said congratulations. The wedding was small, just as he promised. It was held right there in the living room. In front of the fireplace Sabrina had claimed to admire. Mark came up from Boston, his face a mask of polite concern. He pulled me aside in the kitchen and whispered, asking if I was okay with this. I just shrugged. It did not matter if I was okay. Lauren and Ethan flew in. Lauren gave Sabrina a warm, welcoming hug. Ethan clapped Dad on the back and looked at Sabrina with an expression of pure, triumphant success. The neighbors and a few of Dad's old colleagues came. The house was full. But as I circulated with a tray of champagne flutes, I overheard the conversations. They were not congratulating Dad on finding love. They were congratulating him on his assets. One of his former colleagues, a man I had known my whole life, clapped Dad on the shoulder and said, "Charles, you lucky dog, you landed a beautiful woman, and you're sitting on a house worth a gold mine." Another guest, a neighbor, was overheard telling Sabrina, "Well, you certainly landed on your feet. This view alone is worth $1 million. I watched Sabrina. She smiled graciously, deflected with practiced modesty, but her eyes drank in the compliments. She was not just marrying a man, she was acquiring a lifestyle. I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the November wind outside. The wedding was on a Saturday. By Monday, Sabrina had officially moved in, and the house, my mother's house, began to die. It started with the curtains. Mom had loved light. The living room had sheer linen curtains that she and I had picked out together in Portland years ago. I came home from the grocery store one afternoon to find them gone, replaced by heavy, opulent, dark red velvet drapes that blocked the afternoon sun. Sabrina was in the kitchen, humming as she unpacked a box of new, sleek, stainless steel canisters. She saw me staring at the drapes. She said the old ones were faded and threadbare. She said the room needed a bit of drama, a modern touch. The next week, Mom's worn, comfortable armchair, the one with the faded floral pattern where Dad used to read to me, was gone from the living room. I found it in the damp, unfinished basement, shoved in a corner. Sabrina said it did not match the new aesthetic she was going for. She painted the guest room, my old bedroom, a flat, lifeless gray. She replaced the worn oriental rugs with minimalist, industrial-looking carpets. She was not just redecorating, she was systematically erasing every trace of my mother. She was turning our home into her house. Dad seemed oblivious, or perhaps just unwilling to see it. He followed her around like a happy puppy, agreeing with every change, praising her impeccable taste. He was happy. How could I begrudge him that? The final, terrifying piece clicked into place late one night. About a week before Christmas, I could not sleep. The velvet drapes made the house feel suffocating. I went downstairs to get a glass of water. The kitchen was dark, but I heard voices from the back porch. The wind was high, and they must have thought they were inaudible. I froze at the kitchen door. It was Ethan and Sabrina. They were huddled against the cold, sharing a single mug of something steaming. I could only catch snippets of the conversation, carried on the wind. Sabrina was speaking, her voice low and frustrated. He's still hesitant about the power of attorney. He wants to keep Emery on the accounts. Ethan's voice was sharp. He doesn't get a choice. We have to move on the next steps before the new year. My partners are getting nervous. I'm working on it, Sabrina snapped. He's more sentimental than I thought, but he's getting foggier. The new supplements are helping. My blood turned to ice. Supplements? Then Ethan did something that solidified the fear in my gut. He reached out and put his hand on her arm. He rubbed it slowly, a gesture that was far too familiar, far too intimate for a man and his new stepmother. Just get it done, Sabrina, Ethan said. We're almost there. We just need to finalize the trust and get him into the assessment. Once he's declared incompetent, we can liquidate. Emery won't be able to do a thing. Sabrina leaned back against his arm, not pulling away. She looked up at him, and even in the darkness, I could see her smile. Don't you worry, she whispered. By the time Christmas is over, she won't know what hit her. The atmosphere in the house shifted from the uncomfortable silence of a stranger's presence to a suffocating, orchestrated pressure. It was not a sudden storm. It was a slow, creeping fog that seemed designed to make me question my own reality. Sabrina did not attack me directly, at least not at first. She was far too clever for that. Her weapon of choice was concern, a cloying, poisonous concern that she draped over me like a heavy blanket. She started planting the seeds at the dinner table. We were eating a pot roast she had made, heavy on the salt, the meat slightly tough, when she laid her hand on Dad's forearm and sighed, looking at me with pitying eyes. She said that she had been thinking about me all day. She said it just did not seem right for a woman of 33 to be cooped up in an old house with her father and his new wife. She said everyone needs their own space to bloom. I gripped my fork, feeling the metal dig into my palm. I told her I was fine, that my freelance work was going well, and that I was happy to be here for Dad. Sabrina turned to Dad, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that I was clearly meant to hear. She asked him if he did not worry about me. She said that sticking around here, detached from the real world, might be causing me to lose my edge. She asked him if he wanted me to wake up at 40 with nothing to show for my life, but a room in my parents' house. I saw the doubt flicker in Dad's eyes. He looked at me, not with the gratitude he used to show, but with a sudden, cloudy anxiety. He mumbled that maybe she was right. Maybe I should be out meeting people. He said he did not want to be a burden. That was the word that started to echo in our hallways. Burden. Ethan amplified it from Chicago. His video calls became a nightly ritual, a tribunal where Dad was the defendant and his finances were the crime. I could hear Ethan's voice booming from the study, sharp and demanding. He was not asking how Dad felt. He was asking about heating bills, insurance premiums, and grocery costs. One evening, I walked past the open door just as Ethan was shouting. He told Dad that the cost of maintaining the house was bleeding him dry. He said that having me there was an extra mouth to feed, an extra person using electricity and water. He said that if things continued this way, the savings would evaporate before Dad hit 75. I walked in, furious. I told Ethan that I paid for my own food and my share of the utilities. I told him to stop terrifying Dad. On the screen, Ethan just rolled his eyes. He told Dad that this was exactly what he meant, that I was too emotional to understand the hard numbers of retirement planning. He said I was living in a fantasy world while he was trying to keep the family solvent. Dad looked between the screen and me, his hands shaking slightly. He told me to hush. He said Ethan was the financial expert, and we should listen. That was the moment I realized I was losing him. My father. The man who had taught me to question sources and think critically was being rewritten by fear. Then the medication changed. I had been managing Dad's pills since Mom died. I knew the shapes, the colors, the dosages by heart. But one morning, I went to fill his weekly organizer and found a new bottle on the counter. The label was generic, the name of the drug long and unfamiliar. Inside, the pills were small and pale blue, replacing the white oval tablets he had taken for months to manage his anxiety and sleep. I asked Sabrina about it immediately. I found her in the sunroom, flipping through a catalog of expensive patio furniture. I held up the bottle and asked who authorized this. She did not even look up. She said the doctor had switched them during their last appointment. She said the old ones were affecting his liver enzymes, or something like that. She waved her hand dismissively. I told her I wanted to see the prescription. I told her I kept a medical file for Dad and needed to update it. Sabrina sighed, the sound of a parent dealing with a petulant toddler. She pulled out her phone and scrolled for a moment, then shoved the screen in my face. It was a photo of a piece of paper, but it was blurry, the handwriting illegible, the doctor's signature just a scrawl. I tried to take the phone to zoom in, but she snatched it back. She told me to stop being so controlling. She said that she was a healthcare professional, and I was a graphic designer. She asked if I really thought I knew more about pharmacology than she did. She said I was obsessing over details because I had nothing else in my life to focus on. I backed down. I should not have, but I did. I felt small and foolish, standing there in my oversized sweater while she looked so polished and assured. But that night, when Dad took the blue pill, he did not just go to sleep. He disappeared. The decline was terrifyingly rapid. Within a week, the father I knew began to dissolve. He would wake up at noon, his eyes glassy and unfocused. He would walk into a room and forget why he was there. He would start a sentence and let it trail off into silence, staring at the dust motes dancing in the light. The worst incident happened on a Tuesday evening. I had made a shepherd's pie, one of his favorites. We sat down to eat. Me, Dad, and Sabrina. Dad ate mechanically, his movements slow and heavy. He finished his portion and set his fork down. 10 minutes later, while I was clearing the plates, Dad looked up from the table. He looked at the empty placemat in front of him and then at me. He asked, in a voice that trembled with genuine confusion, when we were going to have dinner. He said he was starving. My heart stopped. I told him we had just eaten. I pointed to the dirty plate in my hand. Sabrina did not comfort him. She did not gently remind him. Instead, she let out a sharp, theatric gasp. She looked at me with wide, tragic eyes. She said, loud enough for him to hear, that it was happening faster than she thought. She said his short-term memory was completely shot. Dad looked at her, panic rising in his chest. He asked what was wrong with him. He asked if he was losing his mind. Sabrina reached over and patted his hand, but there was no warmth in it. She told him not to worry, that she would take care of everything because he clearly could not manage anymore. She looked at me and said that this was why we needed professional help, why we needed to make hard decisions. She used his confusion, a confusion she was manufacturing, as proof that he was broken. I called Lauren the next day, begging her to come. I thought if she saw him, she would understand. I thought she would see that this was not normal aging. Lauren flew in for 24 hours. She arrived in a whirlwind of efficiency, checking her watch every 5 minutes. When she saw Dad, he was having a bad afternoon, slurring his words slightly, his coordination off. He spilled coffee on his shirt and started to cry, frustrated and embarrassed. I rushed to help him, to clean it up, but Lauren grabbed my arm. She pulled me into the kitchen, her face tight with anger. She asked me what I was doing. She said Dad looked terrible. She said he looked neglected. I tried to explain about the pills, about the sudden change, about Sabrina's gaslighting. Lauren cut me off. She told me to stop blaming Sabrina. She said it was obvious that I was overwhelmed and incompetent. She said that if I really loved Dad, I would admit that I could not handle this. She said Sabrina was a saint for putting up with this mess. Lauren left that evening. After having a long, whispered conversation with Sabrina in the driveway, as she drove away, I felt the isolation close around me like a physical cage. My sister had looked at the crime scene and blamed the witness. Then came the suits. 2 days after Lauren left, a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A man I did not recognize got out, carrying a leather briefcase. He was from Northbridge Legal Group. Sabrina greeted him at the door like an old friend. Ethan was on speakerphone in the living room, his voice filling the space. They gathered in the dining room. Dad, Sabrina, the lawyer, and Ethan's voice. I tried to walk in. I had a notepad. I intended to take notes. Sabrina stopped me at the threshold. She blocked the doorway with her body. She told me this was a complex financial strategy meeting regarding the estate and long-term care planning. She said Dad was already stressed enough without my nervous energy. I protested. I said I was his daughter and I lived here. I said I had a right to know what they were doing with his assets. Sabrina smiled, a cold, tight stretching of her lips. She said that was exactly the problem, that I lived here, and therefore I had a conflict of interest. She said they needed to discuss things impartially. She said Dad needed to focus, and my presence was a distraction. She closed the heavy oak sliding doors in my face. I stood in the hallway, listening to the murmur of voices, feeling the vibration of my own helplessness. I heard Dad ask a question, his voice weak and wavering. I heard the lawyer answer in smooth, rapid-fire legalese. I heard Ethan interrupt, pushing, pushing, pushing. I felt like a ghost in my own home, invisible and impotent while they carved up the future. The breaking point came 3 nights later. It was 10 o'clock. Dad was sitting in his chair. staring blankly at the television. Sabrina came in with a glass of water and 2 of the blue pills. I stood up. I could not take it anymore. I walked over and placed my hand over the glass. I told her that 2 was too many. I told her that the label said take 1 as needed, and she had been giving him 2 every single night. I told her he was a zombie all day because he was hungover from the medication. Sabrina's face changed. The mask of sweet concern dropped, revealing something ugly and jagged underneath. Her eyes narrowed. She told me to get my hand off the glass. I refused. I told Dad not to take them. I told him the pills were making him sick. Sabrina did not argue. She did not debate. She simply exploded. With a sudden, violent motion, she backhanded the glass. It flew off the side table and shattered against the stone hearth of the fireplace. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Shards of glass and water sprayed everywhere, glittering in the firelight. Dad recoiled, pulling his legs up, covering his face with his hands like a frightened child. He whimpered. Sabrina stood over him, her chest heaving. She screamed that she was trying to help him sleep. She screamed that she was the only one trying to give him peace. She turned to me, her finger pointing like a weapon. She yelled that I was making him agitated, that I was the reason his blood pressure was up, that my constant interference was killing him. She looked at Dad, who was trembling. She told him to look at what I had done. She said I had caused a scene. She said I was unstable. I looked at Dad, waiting for him to tell her to stop, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for the father who had once chased away monsters from under my bed to stand up. He didn't. He looked at the broken glass, then at Sabrina's furious face, and he shrank. He mumbled that he was sorry. He told us to please stop fighting. He stood up shakily and shuffled toward his bedroom, leaving the pills and the wreckage behind. Sabrina looked at me with a triumph that chilled my blood. She stepped over the glass, not bothering to clean it up. She told me to clean up my mess. Then she followed Dad into the bedroom and closed the door. I sank to my knees on the cold floor. I picked up the wet shards of glass one by one. One of them sliced my thumb, and a drop of bright red blood mixed with the water on the hearth. I sat there in the dim light, holding the broken pieces of my life. I realized then that logic would not work. Begging would not work. My siblings were not misguided. They were complicit. My father was not just sick. He was being dismantled. And as I looked at the blue pill dissolving in a puddle of water on the floor, the fog in my own head began to clear. I stopped feeling hurt. I stopped feeling sad. For the first time since coming home, I felt a cold, sharp clarity. They thought they had broken me. They thought I was just the emotional, freeloading daughter who would eventually pack her bags and leave. They were wrong. I wiped the blood from my thumb onto my jeans. I was not going anywhere. But from this moment on, I was not just a witness anymore. I was a spy, and I was going to burn their entire script to the ground. The night of the broken glass changed my focus. I was no longer a grieving daughter trying to hold a family together. I was an operative in enemy territory. I stopped reacting to their moves and started studying their methods. My first target was the medicine cabinet. I had always handled the refills, so I knew the local pharmacy system. Our prescriptions came in white bottles with the blue logo of the Harbor Ridge Pharmacy. The new supplements Sabrina managed, however, were in amber-colored bottles, and the labels were slightly different. When I looked closely, the pharmacy name was a mail-order service based in Nevada. Sabrina, ever efficient, had thrown away all of the old bottles, claiming she was decluttering the cabinet. She wanted to erase the originals, to make the new normal the only reality. But she was sloppy. She missed one of the old bottles, the real prescription for his mild anti-anxiety medication, which had fallen behind the spare toiletries. I compared the labels. The doctor's name was the same, but the drug and the dosage were completely different. That night, I waited until I was sure they were both asleep. The house was silent except for the low groan of the wind and Dad's heavy, almost unnatural snoring from their bedroom, a new, rattling sound that had started since the blue pills. I crept into the bathroom. I took out my phone, turned off the flash, and photographed everything: the new mail order bottle, the blister pack of the pale blue pills, and the old bottle I had hidden. Back in my room, with my laptop pulled under the covers so the light would not escape, I logged into Dad's patient portal for his hospital network. I had set it up for him a year ago to manage his appointments. His entire medical history, every prescription his actual doctor had ever issued, was there. My hands were shaking. I scrolled down to his active medications. There it was: his beta blocker, his statin, and the original prescription for a low-dose sleep aid, to be taken as needed. The dose was 0.5 milligram. The pills were white. The new pills, the ones Sabrina was pushing, were not on his chart. They did not exist in his official medical file. She had not gotten a new prescription from his doctor. She had sourced them herself. She was, I now knew with chilling certainty, deliberately poisoning my father. This knowledge gave me a cold, terrible courage. The next step was the study. Dad kept a small, old-fashioned safe hidden behind a framed print of a schooner. It was not for valuables. It was for important documents: the deed to the house, their marriage license, my mother's will. The combination was my mother's birthday. I had known it since I was a child. The following afternoon, Sabrina announced she was driving to Portland to get a proper manicure and feel human again. She told Dad to take a long nap. As soon as her car disappeared down the long driveway, I went to work. I let myself into the study and locked the door. I moved the heavy schooner print, the wall behind it pale from dust. The safe was there. My fingers fumbled with the dial, spinning the numbers. The soft click as the handle turned sounded as loud as a gunshot to my ears. Inside, everything was as I remembered, except for one addition. On top of my mother's neatly labeled files was a new, crisp folder from Northbridge Legal Group. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled it out. It was a durable power of attorney, and it was not the one my parents had drawn up together years ago, the one that named me and Ethan as co-executors. This one was new, dated just 2 weeks prior. It revoked all previous documents. It gave one person, and one person only, full and total authority over all of Charles Dalton's financial and medical decisions, effective immediately. The name listed as the sole agent was Ethan Dalton. At the bottom was my father's signature. I had seen his signature my entire life. It was a strong, confident script, the cursive of a history teacher who believed in penmanship. The signature on this document was a barely legible, spidery scrawl, the letters trembling, the ink looking as though the pen had been pressed too hard, then not hard enough. It was the signature of a man who was either terrified or drugged. I took out my phone. I photographed every single page, including the notary's signature, which was, conveniently, the same name as the lawyer from Northbridge. I put the folder back, exactly as I had found it. I closed the safe, reset the dial, and rehung the painting, wiping my fingerprints from the frame. I was back in my room, emailing the encrypted photos to a new, secure email address I had created, when Sabrina returned. I did not realize I had left a trace, but that evening, as I was pretending to read a book in the living room, I heard Sabrina talking to Dad in the kitchen. Her voice was syrupy with fake distress. She told him she had just gone into the study to find a pen, and she noticed the painting of the schooner was crooked. She said she had an awful feeling, so she checked the safe. She told him it looked like someone had been inside it. Dad's voice was confused. He said only he and I knew the code. Sabrina paused. She let the silence hang. Then she said that she knew how worried I must be about my future. She said that it was only natural for me to be curious about what my share would be. She said she was just so sad to think that I would go behind his back and snoop through his private papers, as if I did not trust him. She asked him, her voice breaking with false emotion, what kind of person did that to their own father? I closed my book. I did not get up. I did not go in to defend myself. It was useless. The trap had been set and sprung. When Dad came out of the kitchen 20 minutes later, he would not look at me. The trust he had left in me, the last flickering ember, had been snuffed out by Sabrina's calculated performance. I was completely, utterly alone, and that was exactly what I needed to be to make my next call. I went for a walk on the beach, the wind so cold it stung my face and made my eyes water, providing the perfect cover. I walked until the house was just a dark shape on the cliff, and then I called Uncle Mark. I did not cry. I did not ramble. I laid it out like a report. I told him about the conversation I overheard between Ethan and Sabrina. I told him about the mail order pills. I told him about the patient portal and the discrepancy. I told him about the safe, the new power of attorney, and Ethan's name, and I told him how Sabrina had just framed me as a gold digger. On the other end of the line, Mark was silent. He did not interrupt me once. When I finished, the only sound was the crash of the surf and his slow, steady breathing. Then he spoke, and his voice was not the warm, cheerful tone of my uncle. It was the cold, hard voice of a man who builds things and knows, in his bones, when something is fundamentally rotten. He said 2 words: elder abuse. He said that this was not a family dispute anymore. This was a crime. He told me I was right to be scared and right to be angry. He told me to stop thinking of myself as a daughter and to start thinking like a prosecutor. He said I needed to build a case, and I could not do it alone. He said he had a friend in Boston, a lawyer. He said she was not a family lawyer who specialized in amicable divorces. She was a litigator. She specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse, specifically in high-asset family disputes. Her name was Olivia Reyes. Mark gave me her number. He told me to call her, tell her I was his niece, and set up a meeting. He told me not to tell him when I was going. He said to assume my phone was being monitored. He told me to use cash. He wired $500 to my personal bank account, the one my family knew nothing about, from his own. The memo line read, "Happy early Christmas." I booked a round-trip bus ticket to Boston for the next day, using the public library's computer. I told Sabrina I was going to Portland to meet an old friend from Austin who was passing through for the day. It was a weak lie, but she was so confident in her victory after the incident with the safe that she barely even questioned it. She just smiled and told me to have fun, her eyes conveying that she knew I had no friends, no life, and no power. The next morning, I was on the 6 a.m. bus. The 3-hour ride was a blur of icy highways and dark pine trees. Olivia Reyes's office was in a sleek glass building in the financial district. I felt impossibly small, a 33-year-old in a faded parka, walking into a lobby of marble and steel. Olivia was nothing like I expected. She was not an older, stern woman. She was in her late 30s, sharp, and dressed in a navy blue suit that was all business. She did not waste time on pleasantries. She shook my hand, offered me a coffee, and motioned for me to sit. I told her everything, for 1 solid hour. I recited the facts. Starting from the day Dad met Sabrina, I gave her the timeline. I showed her the photos of the pills. I showed her the screenshots of the patient portal. I showed her the photos of the power of attorney. I told her about the house, the closed-door meetings, the way Ethan's voice sounded, the way Sabrina and Ethan had stood on the porch, too close. When I finished, I was exhausted. Olivia just sat there, looking at the legal pad where she had been taking notes. She looked up, and her eyes were sharp, like a hawk's. She said that if we could prove that Charles was under the influence of non-prescribed, sedating medication at the time of the signing, the power of attorney was not just invalid, it was fraudulent. She said that what I was describing was not just greed, it was a conspiracy to commit fraud and, potentially, assault. But then she laid out the hard part. She said our evidence was good, but it was circumstantial. She said they would argue that Dad was confused. They would argue that I was a bitter, disinherited daughter. They would paint me as unstable, just as they were already doing. She said we needed more. We needed proof that was irrefutable. And then she gave me the plan. First, she said, we needed a baseline. We had to get Dad to an independent neurologist, someone they did not know and could not control. We needed a full workup, blood tests, cognitive tests, to prove what was in his system and what his mental state was without the drugs. Second, we needed to follow the money. She asked if I had access to Dad's bank accounts. I told her I was still listed on his checking account. She said to check the transaction history immediately. She said Ethan, working in finance, would be smart enough to hide his tracks. But he was also arrogant. He would have left a trail. Third, and this was the hardest part, she told me to go home and install cameras. She said to get small, Wi-Fi-enabled nanny cams. She told me to put one in the kitchen, one in the living room, and one in the hallway facing the medicine cabinet. She said we needed to catch Sabrina in the act of administering the pills. We needed to record her. She warned me that this was the most dangerous part, if I was caught. Not only would I be thrown out of the house, but they would destroy the evidence and accelerate their plans. She looked at me, her expression softening for the first time. She told me that Ethan was not a small-time player. She said that if he was in private investment, he was likely leveraged. He might be in debt. He might be desperate. She said that desperate people do not play by the rules. She said that I was not just fighting for a house. I was fighting for my father's life, and I had to be one step ahead. I walked out of her office just before noon. The city was loud. The wind was sharp. But I was not cold. For the first time in 2 years, I was not lost. I knew exactly what I had to do. I bought a bus ticket home, and on the way, I stopped at an electronics store. I used the cash Mark had sent me to buy 3 of the smallest, most advanced hidden cameras they had in stock. When I got on the bus, I was no longer Emery Dalton, the freelance designer. I was a trap, and I was heading home to set it. The lie had to be perfect because Sabrina's suspicion was a living thing, constantly prowling the perimeter of our lives. I told her that Uncle Mark wanted to take Dad out for a late breakfast at the diner in town, a brothers-only tradition they used to have years ago. I said I would stay home to clean the bathrooms. That was the key. Offering to do the grunt work made me invisible to her. She saw me as a servant, and servants were rarely threats. It was a Tuesday in early December. The sky was the color of wet slate, and the wind coming off the Atlantic carried the bite of incoming snow. Sabrina had the morning shift at the rehabilitation center. As soon as her red sedan cleared the end of the driveway, the clock started ticking in my head. Uncle Mark pulled his truck up to the porch 3 minutes later. He did not honk. He just waited, the engine idling. I bundled Dad into his heavy wool coat. He was having a relatively good morning, lucid enough to know who Mark was, but still moving with a hesitant, shuffling gait that broke my heart. I told him we were going for a ride. He smiled, trusting me implicitly, which made the deception feel even heavier. We did not go to the diner. We drove 40 minutes inland to a medical park in a town where nobody knew the Dalton name. Dr. Hall's office was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and stale coffee. Mark had arranged this appointment as a second opinion for post-operative fatigue, a vague enough reason to get us in the door without raising flags on the insurance that Sabrina monitored. Dr. Hall was a serious man with wire-rimmed glasses and hands that moved with deliberate precision. While a nurse took Dad's vitals in the next room, I sat across from the doctor and laid my phone on his desk. I showed him the photos I had taken in the dead of night. I showed him the amber bottle from the mail-order pharmacy in Nevada. I showed him the blister pack of blue pills. I showed him the comparison between the blurry prescriptions Sabrina had flashed at me and the official record from the hospital portal. Dr. Hall did not say anything for a long time. He zoomed in on the image of the blue pill. He adjusted his glasses. Then he looked at me, and the professional detachment in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, clinical alarm. He told me that the pill in the photo appeared to be a high-potency sedative, an older class of drug that was rarely prescribed for geriatric patients because of the severe cognitive side effects. He said that combining this with Dad's existing beta blockers could cause extreme confusion, memory loss, and motor control issues that would mimic rapid-onset dementia. I felt a wave of nausea. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another to hear a medical professional confirm it. When Dad came back in, Dr. Hall was gentle but thorough. He conducted a series of cognitive tests, asking Dad to recall words, to draw a clock face, to count backwards from 100 by sevens. Dad struggled. He stumbled over the numbers. He forgot the word for watch, but he tried. And in the moments between the struggle, I saw flashes of him. He made a joke about his handwriting being terrible even when he was a teacher. He asked Dr. Hall if he followed the Red Sox. Dr. Hall ordered a stat blood panel. He told me he wanted to see exactly what was circulating in Dad's bloodstream. He said the initial cognitive assessment showed deficits, yes, but they were inconsistent. Dad was not gone. He was suppressed. The doctor's words were careful, but the implication was terrifying. The man sitting in the chair was trapped behind a chemical wall. We left the clinic with a promise of results within 24 hours. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel of Mark's truck as I drove us to the bank. This was the second stop. The local branch of the credit union where Dad had banked for 30 years was a brick building that felt more like a library. The tellers knew him. They smiled when we walked in, though their smiles faltered when they saw how frail he looked. I led Dad to a desk in the corner. I explained to the branch manager that we were just doing a year-end review of his accounts for tax purposes and needed a printed transaction history for the last 6 months. Dad nodded along, signing the request form with a hand that Mark had to steady. When the manager handed over the stack of papers, I did not look at them immediately. I waited until we were back in the truck, with the heater blasting against the cold. I flipped through the pages. The pension deposits were there, the Social Security checks were there, the utility bills were there. But then I saw them, starting 3 months ago, right around the time of the wedding. There were transfers. They were consistent. $3,000 on the 1st of the month, $2,500 on the 15th, $4,000 on the 30th. The recipient was listed as Harbor Ridge Advisory LLC. I had never heard of it. It sounded official. It sounded local. But my stomach turned over. I took photos of the pages right there in the truck. My fingers numb. I sent them to Olivia Reyes immediately. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was Olivia. Her text was short. She had run a corporate entity search. Harbor Ridge Advisory LLC had been incorporated in Delaware 4 months ago. The registered agent was not a financial advisor. It was Ethan Dalton. My brother was not just managing Dad's money, he was siphoning it. He was draining the accounts into a shell company with a name designed to look like a legitimate investment firm on a bank statement. We got Dad home by 1 in the afternoon. I helped him into his recliner and turned on an old Western movie. He fell asleep almost instantly, exhausted by the outing. Mark squeezed my shoulder, his face grim, and drove away before Sabrina returned. I was alone again, but this time I had weapons. I went into my room and unpacked the shopping bag I had hidden under my bed. The cameras were small, black cubes, smaller than a ring box. I felt like a criminal as I moved through the house that had raised me. I was violating the sanctity of my own home to save it. I placed the first camera in the living room. The bookshelf was filled with Dad's old history hardcovers. I pulled out a thick biography of Churchill and wedged the camera in the gap between the books. The lens was just a pinhole, invisible in the shadows of the shelf. It had a perfect view of Dad's recliner and the side table where Sabrina usually set his evening water glass. The second camera went into the kitchen. Mom had left behind a sprawling spider plant on top of the refrigerator. I climbed on a stool and nestled the device into the soil, angling it down toward the island counter and the medicine cabinet near the pantry. This was the kill zone. This was where she prepared his supplements. The third camera I placed in the hallway upstairs. There was a framed photo of the 3 of us, me, Ethan, and Lauren, taken on a summer vacation 20 years ago. The irony was bitter. I slid the camera behind the frame, tilting it so the lens peered through the gap between the picture and the wall. It covered the door to the master bedroom and the upstairs bathroom. I synced them to my phone. The feeds were clear. I could see the empty living room. I could see the silent kitchen. I could see the ghost of my own face looking back at me from the app. When Sabrina came home at 5, I was in the kitchen, peeling potatoes. I made sure my shoulders were slumped. I made sure I looked defeated. I had not worn makeup in days. I wore my baggiest sweatpants. I wanted her to see a woman who had given up. She walked in, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of expensive perfume. She looked at me, then at the potatoes. She asked if I had cleaned the bathrooms. I told her I had. I kept my voice low, devoid of fight. I told her I scrubbed the grout just like she liked. She smirked. It was a small, victorious twitch of her lips. She walked over to the fridge and poured herself a glass of white wine. She leaned against the counter, right under the spider plant, right under the lens that was recording her every move. She told me she was glad I was finally making myself useful. She said that since I was here rent-free, it was the least I could do. Then came the test. She opened the pantry and took out the amber bottle. She set it on the counter. She looked at me and said that she would handle Dad's evening meds from now on. Since I clearly got confused last time and caused a scene, she asked if I had a problem with that. My instinct was to scream. My instinct was to grab the bottle and throw it through the window. But I remembered Olivia's voice. Don't be impulsive. Be a trap. I looked at the floor. I apologized. I told her she was right. I said I was just tired and stressed. And I did not mean to question her judgment. I said I just wanted Dad to be okay. Sabrina swirled her wine. She took a sip. She told me that was very mature of me. She said she accepted my apology. Then, with the camera rolling above her head, she opened the bottle, shook out 2 blue pills, and crushed them into a small bowl of applesauce. She was comfortable. She was careless. She thought she had broken me, and that arrogance was going to be her prison. The days leading up to Christmas began to blur into a countdown. The tension in the house was physical, like the static in the air before a thunderstorm. Ethan called every single night. His voice on the speakerphone was getting louder, more frantic. He was no longer just checking in, he was pushing. He told Sabrina that the paperwork needed to be signed by the 24th. He said he had a buyer lined up for the house, a developer who wanted to close before the end of the year for tax reasons. He said the market was shifting and they could not afford to wait. I listened from the hallway, out of sight. I could hear the strain in his voice. It was the sound of a man who was running out of runway. On the night of December 23rd, the house was dark. Dad was asleep, heavily sedated by the applesauce Sabrina had fed him at 7. I was in the kitchen, drinking tea in the dark, when I heard the back door open. Sabrina stepped out onto the porch. She did not know I was there. She had her phone pressed to her ear. I moved silently to the window, cracking it open just an inch. The cold air rushed in, carrying her voice. She was arguing. It was a hushed, hissed argument, but the vitriol was clear. She told Ethan to stop pushing her. She said Dad was being difficult, that he had moments where he refused to sign because he wanted to wait for Mark. Ethan's voice was tinny and loud on the other end. I could hear him shouting. He said he did not care about Mark. He said he needed the liquidity now. Sabrina snapped back. She asked him why he was so desperate. She asked him how much he was in the hole. I held my breath. Ethan said something I could not quite hear, but Sabrina's response froze me. She said that $40,000 was a lot of money to lose in a month. She said that if the partners at his firm found out he was leveraging personal accounts to cover his margins, he would go to jail. She told him to calm down. She said she would get the signature on Christmas Day. She said she would make sure Dad was pliable. She said everyone would be there, and she would corner him. She said by the time the turkey was cut, the house would be as good as sold. She hung up and stood there, staring out at the black ocean. I watched her from the shadows. I saw the way her hand trembled slightly as she put the phone in her pocket. They were scared. Ethan was drowning in debt, and Sabrina was his lifeline, using my father as the flotation device. I backed away from the window, my heart hammering a rhythm of war against my ribs. They thought the deadline was Christmas. They thought they were racing against the market. They did not know they were racing against me. I went upstairs to my room and checked the camera feed one last time. The little red dot on the screen blinked steadily. Recording. Always recording. I looked at the USB drive sitting on my desk, loaded with the bank records. I looked at the email from Dr. Hall confirming the toxicology report would be ready by the morning of the 24th. Ethan wanted to settle everything on Christmas. He wanted a showdown. I turned off the lamp and lay in the dark. listening to the wind howl around the eaves of my mother's house. "Okay, Ethan," I whispered to the empty room. "You want Christmas? You've got it." The timestamp on the video file read 11:42 at night. I sat in the darkness of my bedroom, the blue light of the laptop screen illuminating my face, watching the scene unfold in grainy but undeniable high definition. On the screen, the kitchen was dim, lit only by the under-cabinet lights. Sabrina walked into the frame. She was wearing her silk robe, a glass of wine in one hand. She set the glass down on the granite counter, directly beneath the spider plant where I had hidden the second camera. The angle was perfect. It looked straight down at her hands. I watched, my breath held tight in my chest. As she opened the pantry door, she reached to the back of the shelf and pulled out the amber bottle, the one from the mail-order pharmacy in Nevada. She also pulled out a small plastic baggie from her pocket. With practiced efficiency, she opened the bottle and dumped the contents onto a paper towel. Then, she reached into the baggie. The camera's resolution was sharp enough to capture the difference in shape. The pills she had poured out were the pale blue ones. The pills she was now counting out from the baggie were different, slightly larger, darker. She was mixing them. She was creating a cocktail. She swept the original blue pills into the trash compactor and pressed the button. The low hum of the machine crushing the evidence vibrated through my laptop speakers. Then she filled the amber bottle with the new mixture from the baggie and screwed the cap back on tight. She picked up the bottle, shook it once, and whispered. The microphone picked it up clearly. A low, venomous mumble that made my skin crawl. "Sleep for a long time, old man." I hit pause. My hand was shaking so hard I could barely control the trackpad. I had it. I finally had it. She was not just negligent. She was tampering with medication. She was actively ensuring he stayed sedated, likely adjusting the dosage based on whatever legal timeline Ethan was pushing. I saved the clip, encrypting it immediately, but the night's recordings were not finished. I clicked on the next file, time-stamped 20 minutes later. This time, Sabrina was in the living room. She was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. I turned up the volume. She was speaking to Ethan. There was no doubt about it. "He is out cold," she said, her voice sharp with irritation. "I gave him a double dose of the new stuff. He will not be waking up until noon tomorrow at the earliest." A pause as she listened to Ethan on the other end. "Stop worrying," she snapped. "I have the script. I told him the notary is coming at 10. He is so foggy he does not even know what day it is. Just bring the lawyer and the papers. I will guide his hand if I have to. We get the signature, and then we are done." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. They were coordinating the abuse. It was a logistical operation to them. My father was not a person. He was an obstacle to be drugged into submission so they could rob him. But the third video was the one that broke my heart. It was from the following morning, captured by the camera I had wedged between the history books. Dad was in his recliner. He looked terrible, gray-skinned, his eyes sunken. He was trying to stand up. His hand was trembling as he reached for the glass of water on the side table. He missed. His hand knocked the coaster, and the glass wobbled. He tried to push himself up from the chair, his legs shaking under his weight. Sabrina entered the frame. She did not rush to help him. She marched over, her body language aggressive. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Dad mumbled something about being thirsty. He tried to take a step. Sabrina put her hand on his chest. It was not a gentle restraint. She shoved him. It was a hard, deliberate push. Dad was weak, and he collapsed back into the leather chair with a heavy thud. He looked up at her, fear written plainly on his face. "Sit down. Charles," she hissed. "Don't make more work for me. I have enough to do without cleaning up after you. Stay put." She turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, parched and terrified in his own living room. I watched that clip 3 times. Each time, the shove looked more violent. Each time, the look in Dad's eyes cut deeper. This was assault. It was battery. It was elder abuse caught on tape. I pulled the hard drive out of my laptop. I felt like I was handling plutonium. I logged into the secure cloud server Olivia Reyes had set up for me. I uploaded every single second of footage. I named the files by date and incident type: medication tampering Dec 18, MP4, conspiracy call Dec 18 on MP4, physical abuse Dec 19 on MP4. I sent a text to Olivia. Check the server. We have the smoking gun. 2 hours later, my phone rang. It was Dr. Hall. I went out to the garage to take the call, sitting in the front seat of my cold car so Sabrina wouldn't hear. Emery. Dr. Hall's voice was grim. I have the results from the toxicology screen. I gripped the steering wheel. Tell me. His blood serum levels show a high concentration of a benzodiazepine called diazepam, along with a significant amount of a muscle relaxant, cyclobenzaprine, he said. Neither of these are in his chart. Neither of these should be in his system, especially not in combination with his blood pressure medication. I closed my eyes. They are drugging him. This is not therapeutic dosing. Emery. Dr. Hall continued, his voice professional but edged with anger. These levels are high enough to cause severe cognitive impairment, memory loss, and motor dysfunction. In a man of his age, this is dangerous. It puts him at extreme risk for falls, respiratory depression, or worse. This is poisoning. I am writing my official report now. I am flagging this as a medical emergency and a confirmed case of non-accidental poisoning. I thanked him and hung up. I stared at the garage door. My father wasn't developing dementia. He wasn't dying of old age. He was being chemically lobotomized by his son and his new wife for a payout. I called Olivia next. I have Dr. Hall's report, she said immediately, and I have watched the videos. Emery, this is it. This is everything we need. What do we do? I asked. Do I call the police now? Do I throw her out? No, Olivia said, her voice sharp. Not yet. If you call the police now, Sabrina will claim it was a misunderstanding, or that he was agitated and she was medicating him for his own safety. Ethan will hire a high-priced defense attorney and muddy the waters. We need to lock them down completely. She explained the strategy. She was going to combine Dr. Hall's toxicology report, the bank records showing the transfers to Ethan's shell company, the new fraudulent power of attorney, and the video footage into a single, massive legal filing. I am going to see a judge in chambers this afternoon, Olivia said. I am filing for an emergency temporary restraining order and a freeze on all assets. I am asking the court to suspend Ethan's power of attorney immediately pending an investigation into abuse. She paused. But Emery, the court order is just the shield. We need the sword. We need to catch them when they are most confident. We need them to admit it. She told me to wait. She told me that Ethan and Sabrina were planning their big move for Christmas, which was only 3 days away. She said that if we sprang the trap too early, they might destroy other evidence or transfer the remaining money offshore before the banks could lock it down. We needed them to think they were winning until the very last second. Hang tight, she said. Let them think you are defeated. Let them think the house is theirs. It was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. I went back inside the house and watched Sabrina humming in the kitchen. Knowing what she was, I watched her pat Dad's arm and call him sweetie, knowing she had shoved him into a chair hours earlier. That afternoon, an email popped up on my phone. It was from Ethan. The subject line was simply, "Moving Logistics." Emery, it read, Sabrina tells me you have been looking into apartments in Portland. Good. I want to be clear that once the sale of the house is finalized in January, you will need to be fully moved out. We can't have you lingering while the new owners do inspections. I am willing to give you $2,000 for moving expenses if you are out by the first of the year. Consider this a severance package. Do not make this difficult. Ethan. I stared at the screen. He was offering me money to leave my own home. He was so arrogant, so sure of his victory, that he was putting his eviction notice in writing. I forwarded the email to Olivia without a word. It was just another brick in the wall we were building around them. But I could not just sit and watch Dad suffer for 3 more days. I could not let them poison him again. I waited until Sabrina went to take her shower that evening. I knew her routine. She took 45 minutes, playing loud music in the bathroom. I slipped into the kitchen. I went to the pantry. I took down the amber bottle. I had prepared for this. I had a bottle of over-the-counter vitamins that were roughly the same size and shape as the pills Sabrina was using. I dumped her toxic cocktail into a Ziploc bag and hid it in my pocket. More evidence. Then, I filled the amber bottle with the harmless vitamins. I screwed the cap back on and placed it exactly where she had left it. For the next 2 days, I watched her administer the medication. She would crush the vitamins into applesauce, smug and satisfied, thinking she was erasing his mind. The effect on Dad was subtle at first, then dramatic. Without the nightly dose of sedatives, his body began to clear the drugs. By the morning of December 23rd, he was awake at 8 o'clock. He sat at the kitchen table, and his eyes were different. The glassy, dead look was gone. He looked tired, yes, and frail, but he was there. Sabrina was out running errands for the Christmas party, buying expensive wine and decorations to impress the family. It was just me and Dad. He looked at his coffee cup. Then he looked at me. "Emery," he said. His voice was raspy but steady. "Why do I feel like I've been asleep for a month?" I sat down across from him. I took his hand. It was paper thin, but his grip was surprisingly strong. "Dad," I said gently, "we need to talk, and I need you to listen to me. Really listen, even if it sounds crazy." I did not tell him everything. I did not show him the video of the shove. I thought that might break him. But I told him about the pills. I told him that the medicine Sabrina was giving him was not what the doctor prescribed. I told him that it was making him confused. He tried to pull his hand away. "No," he said. "Sabrina loves me. She is taking care of me." "Dad," I said, holding firm, "why did you sign the new power of attorney?" He frowned. The lines on his forehead deepened. I don't remember signing a new one. I signed some insurance papers. Ethan said they were for the house insurance." My heart broke for him. They had tricked him. They had slipped a legal document in with a stack of mundane paperwork, knowing he was too drugged to read the fine print. I pulled out a document Olivia had emailed me. It was a revocation of power of attorney and a temporary designation naming me and Mark as his guardians. "I need you to trust me," I said. "I need you to sign this. It just says that for right now. Until you feel better. Mark and I are the only ones who can make decisions for you. Not Ethan, not Sabrina." He looked at the paper, then he looked out the window at the gray ocean he loved so much. He was wrestling with a terrible truth. To believe me meant accepting that his wife and son were monsters, but the fog was lifting, and with clarity came the undeniable sensation that he had been a prisoner in his own life. He looked at me. He saw the bruise on my arm from where I had bumped into the doorframe carrying boxes, but he looked at it as if seeing my frailty for the first time. He saw the dark circles under my eyes. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he wrote his name, Charles Edward Dalton. It was not the confident signature of his youth, but it was his. It was legal. He pushed the paper back to me. "Don't let them take the house, Emmy," he whispered, using the nickname he hadn't used in years. "I won't, I promised." I scanned the document and sent it to Olivia immediately. She replied within minutes. "Received. The judge has granted the temporary order. The assets are frozen as of 10 a.m. this morning. The police have been notified and are on standby. We are ready." I looked at Dad. He was resting his head on the table, exhausted by the effort of being awake. "Go back to sleep, Dad," I said softly. "When you wake up, it will all be over." Sabrina came home an hour later, bustling with bags of groceries. She looked at Dad dozing in the chair and smiled that tight, predatory smile. "Still out of it?" she asked. I looked up from my book. I forced my face into a mask of resignation. "Yeah," I said. "He hasn't moved all day." "Perfect," she said. She began unpacking champagne bottles. "Tomorrow is going to be a big day." She had no idea. Christmas in Maine was a study in contrasts. Outside, the wind howled off the black ocean, rattling the window panes with a force that felt personal. Inside, Sabrina had declared war on my mother's understated taste. A 10-foot fir tree, so large it brushed the ceiling beams, stood in the bay window, suffocating in 1,000 glittering, ice-blue lights. She had bought new stockings, plush velvet monstrosities embroidered in gold thread, replacing the faded, needlepoint ones Mom had stitched for each of us. The house smelled of new plastic and synthetic cinnamon. I had tried, in my own quiet way, to keep the soul of the house alive. In the kitchen, I spent the morning of Christmas Eve baking Mom's spiced molasses cookies. The rich, warm smell of ginger and cloves was my only act of rebellion, a temporary, fragrant ghost that the pine-scented plug-ins could not entirely overpower. I knew, as I slid the last tray from the oven, that our allies were in place. Olivia and Dr. Hall were checked into a Marriott in Portland, just a 20-minute drive away. They were waiting for my signal. I knew, with a certainty that felt like a shield under my skin, that the court order had been signed by a judge on the morning of the 24th. The accounts were frozen. The house was locked down. Ethan could sign all the papers he wanted. They were worthless. All that was left was to let them walk into the trap. Lauren and her family arrived at noon on Christmas Day. Her husband, David, a perpetually flustered but kind software engineer, wrangled their 2 children, Mia, who was 8, and Leo, who was 6. The kids were a burst of pure, chaotic joy, ripping through the entryway in a flurry of snow boots and excitement over Santa. They were innocent, a reminder of what this day was supposed to be. Lauren hugged me, her grip tight and nervous. She looked exhausted. "Okay," she whispered, pulling back. "Ethan says we're just here to finalize the care plan. Let's just try to be civilized, for Dad, and for the kids." I just nodded. I saw in her eyes that she had been assigned the role of mediator. She still believed this was a problem of logistics, a disagreement that could be solved with a flowchart and a civilized conversation. Ethan arrived an hour later, not from the airport, but from a hotel in town. He walked in like a returning king, his suit perfectly pressed, smelling of expensive cologne. He clapped Dad on the back and then gave Sabrina a kiss, his hand lingering on her waist for a fraction of a second too long. He looked at me, saw me standing by the fireplace, and just nodded, a dismissive gesture. I was the furniture. Dad, for his part, was playing a role. He was clearer-eyed than he had been in months. Thanks to the 2 days of harmless vitamins I'd been feeding him, he was quiet, but watchful. When Sabrina handed him a small cup with a vitamin for his headache, he took it without argument, giving me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink when her back was turned. Sabrina saw his compliance as a sign of her control. She had no idea it was an act of conspiracy between us. Before dinner, Sabrina flitted around the living room, topping up glasses, her voice high and bright. She was performing for Lauren and David, cementing her role as the selfless caretaker. "It's just such a burden," she said, sighing dramatically as she adjusted a velvet pillow. "This big old house, the maintenance is killing Charles, financially and emotionally. We just want to get him somewhere safe, somewhere simple, so he can enjoy his golden years without this weight." I watched her, my hands stuffed into the pockets of my jeans. She was brilliant. I had to give her that. She was selling them a fantasy of liberation, a story where selling the house was an act of kindness, not a heist. We sat down for dinner at 5 o'clock. The table was groaning with food, not from the oven, but from the best catering service in Portland. Smoked salmon, a massive, gleaming turkey, 5 different side dishes I did not recognize. Lauren and David were seated opposite me, with Mia and Leo between them, happily coloring on the paper placemats. Dad sat at one end of the table, Sabrina at the other, her new role as Lady of the Manor on full display. Ethan sat to her right, and I sat to Dad's left. For a while, the only sounds were the scraping of cutlery and David's valiant attempts at small talk about the flight from Denver. The air was so thick with unspoken tension I could barely breathe. Ethan cleared his throat. He stood up, raising his wine glass. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Mia's crayon. "I'd like to make a toast," he began, his voice dripping with false sincerity, "to new beginnings, and to the woman who made it all possible." He smiled at Sabrina, a slick, practiced smile. "To Sabrina, an angel who came into our lives when we were drowning and saved our father, we are all, truly, in your debt." Sabrina blushed, lowering her eyes. "Oh, Ethan, I just did what anyone would do." Ethan's smile turned into a smirk. He turned his gaze on me, down the length of the table. "And a toast to my little sister. Emery, still holding down the fort. I see. Haven't found that job in the city yet, huh?" I felt the blood rise in my cheeks. David stopped chewing. "Well," Ethan continued, "don't you worry. Family always comes first." He sipped his wine, his eyes mocking me. Before I could respond, Sabrina jumped in, her voice layered with faux concern. "Oh, Ethan, be nice. Emery's just very attached to this house. Aren't you, dear?" She turned to Lauren, her expression one of deep, womanly sympathy. "I've tried to help her. Lauren, I really have. I even sent her a few listings for some lovely little apartments in Portland. I found a wonderful one, just last week, but she just refuses to look at opportunities. She says she won't leave." The narrative was set. I was the ungrateful, lazy, stubborn child, clinging to a piece of property. I set my water glass down. My hand was perfectly steady. "That's not exactly true, Sabrina." The table went quiet. Even Leo stopped coloring. "I've just been focused on Dad's health," I said, my voice clear and calm. I looked directly at Lauren. "In fact, I've been getting a second opinion on his condition. His new doctor seems to think his cognitive function is surprisingly strong." Sabrina's smile froze. "New doctor? What are you talking about? Emery? His doctor and I are in complete agreement about his prognosis." "I'm talking about Dr. Hall," I said. "The neurologist. He says that, medically, there is absolutely no reason for Dad to be in a nursing home. He said the fog he's been experiencing is atypical." Sabrina's face flushed a dark, angry red. "You went behind my back?" she seethed, her voice losing its sweetness. "How dare you? You can't just play doctor. Emery, you have no idea what you're talking about. You are actively obstructing his care plan." "I'm not obstructing anything," I started. "Enough!" Ethan's voice was a roar. He slammed his hand on the table, not his open palm, but his fist. The silverware jumped. The wine in his glass sloshed. Mia and Leo both flinched, and Leo let out a small, terrified whimper. "I am tired of this childish drama," Ethan bellowed, standing up so fast his chair almost toppled. He looked like he was about to explode. I was trying to wait, to be civilized about this. But since Emery is forcing the issue, it's time for a major announcement. It concerns the future of this house and Dad's care. He raised his glass, ready to deliver the killing blow. "Ethan, please," I cut him off, my voice sharp, but I looked at the children. Mia's eyes were wide with tears. "It's Christmas. Look at the kids. Can't this wait until after we've had dessert?" It was a calculated move. I had made him the villain, the man who was ruining Christmas for the children. Lauren, seeing her daughter's distress, immediately jumped in. "Emery's right. Ethan, stop it, right now. You're scaring them." Ethan looked trapped, his face mottling with rage. He was a bull that had been turned just before the charge. He sat down, heavily, and glared at me across the table. The rest of the meal passed in a state of suffocating silence. David and Lauren were focused on calming the children, their voices low and soft. The moment David took the kids into the living room to look at the train set under the tree, Sabrina stood, her chair scraped loudly on the floor. "Emery, a word, in the kitchen, now." She did not wait for me. She stalked off, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I looked at Dad. He met my gaze, his eyes clear and terrified. I gave him a small, reassuring nod. I pushed back my chair and followed her. The kitchen was brightly lit, a stark contrast to the dim dining room. Mom's old, Twinkling Christmas lights were still strung over the window, a small, brave defense against Sabrina's sterile decor. She did not wait for the swinging door to stop moving. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her voice a low vibration of fury. "Who is Dr. Hall?" "He's a neurologist," I said calmly. She grabbed my arm, her perfectly manicured nails dug into my skin. "You have no idea what you've just done. You are a stupid, sentimental, pathetic little girl. Ethan is trying to save this family, and you are trying to ruin it because you can't get a life. Let go of me, Sabrina." "You listen to me," she snarled, her face just inches from mine. The smell of her wine-soaked breath washed over me. "You are going to walk back in there. You are going to apologize to Ethan. And you are going to agree to the plan. You are going to be out of this house by the 1st of the year. Do you understand me?" I looked her straight in the eye. I saw the desperation there, underneath the rage. She was scared. My probe about the doctor had hit a nerve. "No." The word hung in the air between us. It was so quiet, so final. Her eyes widened. What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, my voice as cold and clear as the ice forming on the windows. "I'm not leaving. I'm not apologizing. And I'm not agreeing to your plan. In fact, Sabrina, everything is about to change." Her face contorted. The mask of the charming stepmother dissolved, revealing the predator underneath. She saw the fight in my eyes, and it made her panic. She shoved me, hard, against the kitchen counter. The edge of the granite dug into my back. "You little—" The door swung open. It was Ethan. He was holding his wine glass, his patience completely gone. "What is taking so long?" he snapped. "I'm not waiting for dessert. We're finishing this now." He turned and stormed back into the dining room. Sabrina looked at me, her eyes filled with a promise of violence. Then she smoothed her dress, composed her face, and followed him. I took a single, deep breath. I pushed myself off the counter. I followed them back into the room, which felt less like a dining room and more like a gallows. Ethan was standing at the head of the table. He was furious, his face red, his control gone. He picked up his steak knife and tapped it, sharp and rhythmic. Clang, 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 against his crystal wine glass. The sound cut through the air, silencing the conversation Lauren and David were having. "Listen up, all of you," he commanded. "This is happening now." I slipped my hand into my pocket. My thumb found the side button on my phone, the one that would unmute the call I had placed to Olivia 30 minutes ago. The camera on the living room bookshelf was recording. The stage was set. This was it. The trap was ready to spring. Ethan stood at the head of the table, the crystal wine glass still ringing from his knife taps. He looked like a CEO addressing a boardroom of underperforming employees, not a son addressing his family on Christmas Day. The candlelight flickered against the gold buttons of his blazer. He took a breath, inflating his chest with the confidence of a man who believes he holds all the cards. "I have an announcement," he said, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "And frankly, it is long overdue." He placed a hand on the table, leaning forward slightly. "For the past few months, Sabrina and I have been working tirelessly to secure a stable future for Dad. We have faced a lot of resistance, mostly from people who do not understand the financial realities of this estate. But I am happy to say that the uncertainty ends today." He paused for effect. I watched his eyes flick to me, cold and triumphant. "Dad has signed a full durable power of attorney granting me control over his financial and medical decisions," he declared. "The paperwork was finalized 2 weeks ago. Using that authority, Sabrina and I have secured a placement for him at the Pines, a premier assisted living facility in Portland. It is top tier, best in the state." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "And to pay for that level of care, because let us be honest, it is not cheap. We have accepted an offer on this house. The sale closes on the 15th of January. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum that sucked the air out of the room. Lauren dropped her fork. It clattered against her china plate, a harsh, jarring sound. She looked from Ethan to Dad, her mouth slightly open. "Wait," she said, her voice trembling. "Ethan, you said we were just talking about options today. You said we were going to decide as a family. You sold the house? Without asking us?" Ethan waved a hand dismissively. "There was no time for a committee meeting. Lauren, the market is volatile. We had a cash offer, over asking price. I had to act. It is done." Sabrina reached over and draped her arm around Dad's shoulders. She leaned her head against his, performing the role of the heartbroken but practical wife. "It is for the best. Charles," she cooed, speaking to him as if he were a toddler, "you know how hard the stairs are for you. You will have people to wait on you hand and foot at the Pines. No more drafts, no more leaks, just rest." Dad did not look at her. He was staring down at his plate of uneaten turkey, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He looked like a man trying to wake up from a nightmare. Ethan turned his gaze fully onto me. The mockery was gone, replaced by a cold, hard sneer. "And that brings me to you, Emery." I sat perfectly still. I could feel the camera on the bookshelf recording. I could feel the phone in my pocket broadcasting the audio to Olivia. I was the anchor in the storm. "You have had a nice long vacation here," Ethan said, "living rent-free, playing house, but the party is over. Since the house is sold, and the new owners take possession in 3 weeks, you need to be gone." He took a sip of his wine, savoring the moment. "Consider this your official notice. This dinner is the last meal you will eat here as a resident. You have 48 hours to pack your things and vacate the premises. It is time you started looking out for yourself. Emery." Lauren made a small, choked sound. "Ethan, you cannot just kick her out in the snow. It is Christmas. She is 33 years old." "Lauren," Ethan snapped, "she is not a child. She is a leech, and I am cutting her off." I stood up. The motion was slow, deliberate. I did not knock over my chair. I did not slam my hands on the table. I just stood. The change in elevation shifted the dynamic in the room. Ethan had to look up at me, just slightly. "You are wrong." "Ethan," I said. My voice was steady, surprisingly deep. It did not shake. He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Wrong about what? The law? I have the papers. Emery, I have the signature." "You have a signature that was obtained through fraud," I said. The word hung in the air. Fraud. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Watch your mouth." Dad was never informed of what he was signing. I continued, keeping my eyes locked on his. He was told those were insurance papers, and more importantly, he was chemically restrained when he signed them. Sabrina gasped. She shot up from her chair, her face twisting. "That is a lie." "Is it?" I asked, turning to face her. I spoke clearly, ensuring the microphone caught every syllable. "You have been feeding him high doses of diazepam and cyclobenzaprine, disguising them as supplements. You have been keeping him in a medically induced fog for months so that he would be compliant. That is not care. Sabrina, that is battery, and it renders any legal document he signed during that period completely void." Ethan scoffed, shaking his head in mock disbelief. He looked at Lauren and David, gesturing to me with his wine glass. "You see?" he said. "You see what I deal with? She watches too many movies. She is paranoid. She is hysterical." "I am not hysterical. Ethan," I said, "I am the only one in this room who knows exactly what is happening." Dad spoke. It was a quiet voice, raspy and weak, but it cut through Ethan's laughter like a knife. I don't remember." Everyone turned to look at him. Dad was looking up, his eyes moving from Ethan to Sabrina. "I don't remember signing a power of attorney," he said. "I remember signing insurance forms. You told me they were for the roof." Sabrina moved instantly. She grabbed his hand, squeezing it tight, her nails digging in. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice rising in pitch. "See? This is what I mean. This is the dementia talking. You forget things. Charles, you forget whole days. It is the disease." She looked at the rest of the table, her eyes wide and pleading. "He is so confused lately," she said. "It breaks my heart. He does not know what is real anymore. I did not let her finish the narrative. He is not confused. Sabrina, I said, he is recovering from being poisoned, and I know that because I took him to a neurologist 3 days ago. Ethan went still. The wineglass in his hand stopped halfway to his mouth. A neurologist? He repeated. Dr. Hall. I said, we went on Tuesday. He ran a full toxicology panel. We have the results. Ethan, we know exactly what was in his blood, and we know it did not come from his pharmacy. Ethan's face drained of color. For the first time, the arrogance cracked. He looked at Sabrina. There was a question in his eyes, a sudden, terrifying realization that she had lost control of the situation. That is ridiculous, Ethan stammered, but his voice lacked its usual boom. You took him on a meaningless trip to some quack doctor to try and undermine us. It proves nothing. It proves everything, I said. Sabrina made a sound like a wounded animal. She stepped away from Dad. Turning on me, her chest was heaving. The veneer of the perfect wife was gone. Stripped away by the panic of a grifter who realizes the mark has woken up. You selfish little brat, she screamed. The volume was shocking. In the other room, I heard Leo start to cry. You have done nothing but get in the way, she yelled, advancing on me. I have cooked, I have cleaned, I have wiped his mouth, I have dealt with his pathetic whining for months. And you? You sit in your room and judge me? She was closing the distance between us. I did not retreat. I stood my ground by the kitchen door. You are trying to destroy this family, she shrieked. We had a plan. We were going to be set. And you are ruining it because you are jealous. You are ruining Christmas for everyone because you cannot stand that you are a failure. I looked her dead in the eye. You do not love him, I said softly. You never loved him. You just loved the house. That was the spark. Sabrina snapped. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She lunged at me. It happened fast, but to me, it felt like slow motion. Her arm pulled back. Her hand, adorned with the diamond ring my father had bought her, came flying forward. The impact was blinding. She slapped me across the face with a force that knocked the breath out of my lungs. It was not a theatrical slap. It was a blow meant to hurt, meant to silence. My head snapped to the side. I stumbled back, crashing into the kitchen cabinets. I tasted copper. My lip was split. My cheek felt like it was on fire. Sabrina did not stop. She grabbed me by the shoulders and shoved me hard against the granite counter. She pinned me there, her face inches from mine, her eyes wild and dilated. You shut your mouth, she hissed, shaking me. You shut your mouth or I will make you wish you had never been born. The room was frozen. At the table, Lauren had her hands over her mouth. David had jumped up, but he was standing by the door to the living room, paralyzed by the sudden violence. And Dad? Dad was sitting 3 feet away. He saw his wife strike his daughter. He saw the blood on my lip. He saw the woman he married pinning his child against the cabinetry. He tried to move. I saw his hands grip the arms of his chair. I saw his mouth open to scream. But his body betrayed him. The residue of the drugs, the shock, the physical frailty, it all conspired to lock him in place. He sat there, trembling, tears streaming down his face, unable to lift a finger to stop her. He just watched. It was the most painful moment of my life, seeing his helplessness. It was the physical manifestation of everything they had done to him. They had stolen his agency so completely that he could not even protect his own child. Ethan did not step in. He did not pull Sabrina off. He did not check to see if I was okay. Instead, he slammed his wineglass down on the table so hard the stem snapped. Red wine spilled across the white tablecloth like a bloodstain. "God damn it, Emery," he roared. He pointed a shaking finger at me, ignoring the fact that Sabrina was currently assaulting me. "Look what you did. You pushed her too far." He looked around the room, his face purple with exertion. "You ruined Christmas," he screamed. "Are you happy now? You ruined everything." In the living room, The wails of the children grew louder. Mia was screaming for her mommy. Sabrina let go of me. She stepped back, breathing hard, realizing what she had done. She looked at her hand, then at me, then at the silent witnesses at the table. I stood up straight. I reached up and wiped the blood from the corner of my mouth with the back of my hand. It came away bright red. My cheek was throbbing with a pulse of its own. My ear was ringing, but inside, I felt a cold, iron calm. I looked past Sabrina. I looked past Ethan, who was still ranting about how I had destroyed the holiday. I looked past my weeping father. I looked directly at the spider plant on top of the refrigerator. The tiny black lens of the camera was invisible in the foliage, but I knew it was there. I knew it had seen the slap. I knew it had heard the threats. I knew it had captured Ethan's refusal to intervene. I looked at the camera, and for a split second, I let my eyes convey the message to Olivia, who I knew was watching on her screen in the hotel room. "We got them." I turned back to Ethan. He was still yelling, trying to regain control of the narrative, trying to make this my fault. "Get out," he shouted. "Get your things and get out of my house." I did not shout back. I did not cry. I simply pulled my phone from my pocket. The screen was still active. The call was still connected. I tapped the speakerphone icon. "I think," I said, my voice cutting through his noise, "that you are going to want to answer the door. Ethan." Ethan stopped mid-sentence. "What?" The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, cheerful ding-dong that echoed through the sudden silence of the house. Ethan looked at the door, then back at me. Confusion clouded his rage. "Who is that?" he demanded. I looked at Sabrina, who was backing away from me, her hands trembling. "It is the consequences," I said. The doorbell rang again, insistent. Ethan marched to the front door, muttering curses. He yanked it open, ready to scream at whatever neighbor or caroler had dared to interrupt his power play. But it was not a neighbor. Through the open archway of the dining room, I saw them. Olivia Reyes stood on the porch, holding a thick manila folder. Beside her was Dr. Hall, and behind them, filling the doorway with their uniforms and the cold winter night, were 2 police officers. Ethan froze. He took a step back. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. Olivia stepped across the threshold. She did not smile. She looked past him, into the dining room, her eyes locking onto mine. She saw the blood on my lip. Her jaw tightened. She turned back to Ethan and held up the folder. "Ethan Dalton?" she asked. "Yes." "I am serving you with an emergency court order," she said, her voice carrying clearly into the silence of the house. "It suspends your power of attorney effective immediately. It also freezes all assets connected to Charles Dalton." She motioned to the officers. "And these officers," she continued, looking over Ethan's shoulder at Sabrina, who had gone white as a sheet, "would like to have a word with Mrs. Cole regarding the assault we just witnessed live on camera." Ethan looked back at me. The arrogance finally died. In his eyes, I saw the terrified realization that the sister he had dismissed, the sister he had mocked, the sister he had slapped down, had been holding the knife to his throat the entire time. I did not smile. I just touched my bruised cheek and waited for the handcuffs. I did not scream. I did not lunge back at her. I stood there, the taste of copper filling my mouth, and felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. The physical sting on my cheek was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the satisfaction of knowing the trap had just snapped shut. I reached into my pocket, my hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I pulled out my phone, which was still connected to the call, and brought it to my ear. "It is time," I said. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Across the room, Lauren let out a gasp. She was staring at me, her eyes wide and horrified. She was looking at the trickle of bright red blood running from the corner of my lip down to my chin. For months, she had listened to Ethan's smooth explanations and Sabrina's sweet deflections. But blood was a truth that could not be spun. She looked from my face to Sabrina, who was standing by the counter, breathing heavily, her hands clenched into fists. "Oh my God. Emery," Lauren whispered, her hand covering her mouth. David, her husband, reacted with the instinct of a father. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He did not say a word to Ethan or Sabrina. He simply walked over to the corner where Mia and Leo were huddled, looking terrified. He took them by the hands. "Come on, kids," David said, his voice tight. "We are going to go play in the guest room, right now." "But Dad," Mia started to protest, looking at the spilled wine and the tension in the room. "Now," David said, firmer this time. He ushered them out of the room, shielding their eyes from the tableau of family violence, and closed the heavy double doors behind him. The click of the latch sounded like a judge's gavel. We were left in silence. Ethan looked at the closed doors, then at me, his face mottling with a mixture of embarrassment and fury. "You happy?" He spat at me. "You just traumatized your niece and nephew." I did not answer him. I picked up a napkin from the table and pressed it to my lip. I looked at the grandfather clock in the hallway. It took exactly 8 minutes. The doorbell rang. It was not a tentative ring. It was a long, authoritative press. Ethan threw his hands up. "Who is that? If that is one of your friends, Emery, I swear to God I will have them arrested for trespassing." I walked past him. I walked past Sabrina, who was refusing to look at me. I opened the front door. The cold wind swept into the hallway, but the heat coming from the 3 people on the porch was intense. Olivia Reyes stood in the center, holding a thick black leather briefcase. To her left was Dr. Hall, looking grim in a heavy wool coat, and to her right was a uniformed police officer, a man I recognized from town named Officer Miller. Ethan came storming into the hallway behind me. "What is this?" he demanded, puffing out his chest. "This is a private residence. We are in the middle of a family dinner. Get off my porch." Officer Miller stepped forward. He did not look intimidated. He looked bored, the way cops do when they know they have the upper hand. "We received a call regarding a domestic disturbance and a credible report of elder abuse," the officer said. "We have probable cause to enter." "Elder abuse?" Ethan laughed. A high, incredulous sound. "That is absurd. My father is fine. This is just my sister trying to cause a scene." Dr. Hall stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses. "Actually, Mr. Dalton, your father is not fine. I am Dr. Hall, a board-certified neurologist. I examined Charles Dalton 3 days ago." Ethan froze. The name registered. "We are coming in," Olivia said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a wrecking ball. She walked past Ethan without waiting for an invitation. The others followed. They marched into the living room, the snow from their boots melting on the hardwood floors Sabrina had been so obsessed with protecting. The living room became a makeshift courtroom instantly. Olivia set her briefcase on the coffee table and took out her laptop. Dr. Hall stood by the fireplace. Officer Miller stood by the door, his hand resting casually on his belt, watching Sabrina. Sabrina had retreated to the sofa, sitting as far away from Dad as possible. Dad was still in his dining chair, turned to face the living room, looking small and bewildered, but his eyes were fixed on Olivia. Ethan tried to regain control. He stood in the center of the room, his hands on his hips. "This is harassment," he declared. "I am the power of attorney for Charles Dalton. I have the legal authority to make decisions for him, and I am telling you to leave." "We will get to that," Olivia said coolly. She plugged a flash drive into her laptop. "But first, we need to discuss the toxicology report." She nodded to Dr. Hall. The doctor cleared his throat. He opened a folder he was holding. "I ran a comprehensive blood panel on Charles Dalton on Tuesday morning." He began. "The results were alarming. I found high concentrations of diazepam and cyclobenzaprine in his system." Lauren, who was standing near the doorway, frowned. "What are those?" "They are a strong sedative and a muscle relaxant," Dr. Hall explained. "Neither of these drugs appear on Charles's official medical history. They were not prescribed by his primary care physician or his cardiologist. In fact, combined with his blood pressure medication, this cocktail creates a state of chemically induced cognitive impairment. It mimics dementia, causes memory loss, and significantly increases the risk of falls. Ethan crossed his arms. So, maybe he took some old pills he found. He is confused. That is what we have been telling you. He did not take them by accident, Olivia said. She hit the spacebar on her laptop. The screen was facing the room. The video from the kitchen pantry began to play. It was grainy, but the image was undeniable. It showed Sabrina standing at the counter. It showed her taking the 2 different bottles. It showed her mixing the pills. It showed her crushing them into the applesauce. And then, clear as a bell, came the audio. "Sleep for a long time, old man." The room went dead silent. Sabrina let out a strangled sound. That is illegal. You cannot record me in my own home. That is a violation of privacy. Officer Miller spoke up from the door. "Actually, ma'am, this is Mr. Dalton's home, and we have a signed consent form from Mr. Dalton authorizing the installation of security cameras in common areas for his own protection." Olivia clicked to the next video. It was the footage from the living room. It showed Dad trying to stand up. It showed him stumbling. And then, it showed Sabrina walking over and shoving him back into the chair. It was violent. It was dismissive. It was abuse. Lauren let out a sob. She put a hand against the wall to steady herself. She looked at Sabrina with a mixture of horror and disgust. "You pushed him," Lauren whispered. "You told me he fell. You told me his legs were giving out." Sabrina was shaking her head frantically. "He was agitated. I was trying to keep him safe. The video is out of context." And finally, Olivia played the last clip, the one from 10 minutes ago. It showed the argument in the kitchen. It showed Sabrina cornering me. It showed her screaming that I was ruining their plan. And then, in high definition, it showed her hand connecting with my face. The sound of the slap cracked through the silent room like a whip. Olivia closed the laptop. "That," she said, looking at Sabrina, "is assault. And combined with the chemical restraint of a vulnerable adult, we are looking at multiple felony counts." Ethan looked like he was going to be sick. He ran a hand through his hair, his composure crumbling. "Okay, look," he stammered. Sabrina clearly has some anger issues. I did not know about the pills. I had no idea she was doing that. I am a victim here too." Olivia looked at him with eyes like flint. "Are you?" she asked. She reached into her briefcase again. She pulled out a stack of papers clipped together. "Because according to the bank records we subpoenaed this morning, you seem to be a very active participant." She handed the papers to Lauren. Lauren took them, her hands trembling. "What are these?" Lauren asked. "Those are transaction records from your father's accounts," Olivia said. "Over the last 6 months, $50,000 has been transferred to a company called Harbor Ridge Advisory LLC. Lauren flipped through the pages. "I see the transfers. Who are they?" Olivia pulled out another document. "This is the certificate of formation for Harbor Ridge Advisory LLC from the state of Delaware." She pointed to a line on the bottom of the page. "The sole owner and registered agent is Ethan Dalton." Lauren looked up at her brother. Her face was wet with tears, but her eyes were blazing with a fury I had never seen in her. "You stole it," she said. Her voice was shaking. "You told me Dad agreed to move the money into a trust. You told me it was for tax purposes. You told me you were protecting his assets." Ethan backed away. "Lauren, listen, it is an investment vehicle. I was managing it for him. I was going to pay it back with interest once the market turned." "You were gambling with Dad's life savings," Lauren screamed. She threw the papers at him. They scattered across the floor like white leaves. "You were stealing from him to cover your own debts." Ethan's face turned a blotchy red. "I had to. Do you have any idea the pressure I'm under? The firm was going to audit me. I needed liquidity." He stopped, realizing he had just confessed in front of a police officer. Officer Miller took a notebook out of his pocket and wrote something down. Ethan straightened his jacket, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. "It does not matter," he said, his voice tight and desperate. "I have the power of attorney. Dad signed it. It gives me broad authority to manage his assets as I see fit. If I decide to invest in my own company, that is within my rights as his agent. You cannot touch me." Olivia smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. "Actually, Ethan, you don't have the power of attorney." Ethan blinked. "Yes, I do. I have the hard copy right here in my bag." "That document is void," Olivia said. She pulled one final document from her briefcase. It was a single sheet of stiff, cream-colored paper. Because 1 week ago, Charles Dalton visited a notary public in town. He signed a revocation of all previous powers of attorney, and he executed a new one, designating Emery Dalton and Mark Dalton as his joint agents. Ethan snatched the paper from her hand. He stared at it. He stared at the date. He stared at Dad's signature. Shaky, but legible. This is impossible," Ethan sputtered. "He was drugged. You said it yourself. If he was drugged when he signed mine, he was drugged when he signed yours." Olivia shook her head. "Dr. Hall examined him the morning he signed this," she said. "He certified that Charles was lucid and capable of making legal decisions at that specific time. We have the affidavit attached. Your document, however, was signed during the period of peak toxicity. Yours is fraud, ours is valid." She stepped closer to him. "And 10 minutes ago, a judge signed a temporary restraining order freezing all assets belonging to Charles Dalton. You cannot sell the house. You cannot touch the bank accounts. You cannot even use your father's credit card to buy a stick of gum. It is over. Ethan." Ethan looked at the paper in his hand. Then he looked at the house around him. The house he had already spent the commission on in his mind. He crumbled the paper in his fist and threw it on the floor. The room felt small, suffocating. The Christmas lights on the tree blinked rhythmically. Red, green, gold, casting long, dancing shadows over the faces of the people who had tried to dismantle my family. Officer Miller stepped forward. "Mr. Dalton? Mrs. Cole?" he said, his voice devoid of holiday cheer. "We are opening an official investigation into elder abuse, fraud, and assault. I am going to need you both to provide identification. And I am issuing a verbal warning right now. Do not attempt to leave the state. Do not attempt to contact Charles Dalton or Emery Dalton." Sabrina began to cry. It was a loud, ugly sound, stripped of all her usual manipulation. She looked at Ethan, waiting for him to fix it, but Ethan was staring at the floor, looking at the scattered bank records that detailed his betrayal. Lauren walked over to Dad. She knelt beside his chair. She put her head in his lap and wept. "I am so sorry. Daddy," she sobbed. "I didn't know. I really didn't know." Dad rested his hand on her hair. His hand was trembling, but the look on his face was one of immense, weary relief. He looked up at me. He did not smile, but his eyes were clear. He saw me. He saw the blood on my lip and the phone in my hand. He gave me a single, slow nod. I walked over to the fireplace and leaned against the mantel. My legs felt like jelly. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I looked at the scene before me. It was not the Christmas dinner we had planned. The turkey was cold. The wine was spilled. The family was shattered. But as I watched Officer Miller taking statements from a pail, shaking Ethan, and Olivia collecting the evidence files, I knew one thing for certain. Ethan was wrong. I hadn't ruined Christmas. I had saved it. The room was suspended in a silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure had dropped before a hurricane. Olivia Reyes stood in the center of the living room, her presence commanding more authority than anyone else in the house. She turned slowly, deliberately, away from Ethan and Sabrina, and directed her attention to the man sitting in the leather recliner. "Mr. Dalton," Olivia said. Her voice was soft, stripped of the sharp legal edge she had used on Ethan, but it was clear enough to reach every corner of the room. "I need you to answer a question for me, and I need you to answer it honestly." She crouched down slightly so she was at eye level with him, ignoring Sabrina, who was hovering nearby, dabbing at dry eyes. "If you were not being pressured by anyone, And if you were not being told that you were sick or confused, would you want to leave this house? Would you want to live in a nursing home? The question hung there. For months, people had been speaking for Charles Dalton. Ethan had spoken for him about finances. Sabrina had spoken for him about his health. Lauren had spoken for him about what was best. I had spoken for him in his defense. But this was the first time anyone had simply stopped the noise and asked the man himself. Charles blinked. The effects of the days without sedatives were evident. He was tired, his movements were slow, and his skin was pale, but the fog that had obscured his personality was gone. He looked around the room. He looked at the Christmas tree, blinking under the weight of Sabrina's excessive decorations. He looked at the window, where the reflection of the room floated against the dark, snowy night. He looked at Ethan, who was sweating in his expensive suit. Then, his gaze landed on me. He looked at the red, angry mark on my cheek where his wife had slapped me. He looked at the split in my lip. He looked at the way I was leaning against the mantel for support, exhausted but standing guard. Then he moved his eyes to Sabrina, the woman who had shoved him, the woman who had mixed his pills, the woman who had just physically assaulted his daughter in his own kitchen. The silence stretched out. 5 seconds, 10 seconds. Ethan opened his mouth to interrupt, to prompt him, but Officer Miller took a subtle step forward, and Ethan clamped his mouth shut. Finally, Charles took a breath. It was a shaky, rattling sound, but when he spoke, the tremor in his voice was gone. "I do not want to leave," he said. Sabrina let out a small, sharp gasp, but Dad did not look at her. He kept his eyes on Olivia. "I do not want to leave the house my wife loved," he continued. "I promised her I would keep it, and I do not want to go to a home. I am not an invalid. I was just asleep." He paused, and then he turned his head to look directly at Ethan. The look in his eyes was not anger. It was a profound, crushing disappointment that was far harder to witness. "And I do not want anyone touching my money," he said, his voice hardening. "Not anymore. Nobody touches a dime except for Emery and Mark." Sabrina saw the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Panic, raw and ugly, seized her. She threw herself at the arm of his chair. Grabbing his hand in both of hers, she fell to her knees on the rug, looking up at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Charles, honey, listen to me," she pleaded, her voice pitching up into a desperate whine. "You do not know what you are saying. You are confused. It is the dementia. Emery has been whispering in your ear, twisting your mind against us. She is manipulating you because she wants the house for herself." She squeezed his hand, trying to force the intimacy, trying to trigger the muscle memory of his dependence on her. "I love you, Charles," she sobbed. "I am your wife. We are a team. Don't let them do this to us." Charles looked down at her hands gripping his. For months, those hands had been his lifeline. They had fed him, dressed him, and guided him, but now, he knew what else those hands had done. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand away. It was a small movement. He simply retracted his arm, pulling it back onto his lap. But the rejection was absolute. It was a physical severing of the bond. Sabrina's hands were left clutching empty air. She froze, her fake sobs cutting off in her throat. She stared at him, stunned. That small withdrawal of affection was the moment she knew, with total certainty, that her reign was over. Lauren let out a long, ragged breath. She had been watching the scene unfold with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. The reality of what she had enabled had finally crashed down on her. She walked past Ethan. She did not look at him. She walked straight to me. "Emery," she choked out. She looked at my bruised face. She reached out a hand as if to touch it, then pulled back, terrified of causing more pain. "I am so sorry." She wept. "God, Emery, I am so sorry. I thought I was helping. They told me you were crazy. They told me you were the problem. I didn't see it. I should have seen it." She turned to the police officer. "Officer," she said, her voice gaining a sudden, fierce strength, I want to make a statement. I want it on the record that I witnessed Sabrina Cole assault my sister. And I want to testify that Ethan told me the financial transfers were agreed upon. He lied to all of us. Ethan felt the walls closing in. He was cornered. His allies were gone. His legal standing was revoked. And now his own sister was offering to testify against him. The pressure that had been building inside him, the debts, the lies, the frantic maneuvering, finally exploded. He turned on Sabrina. "This was her idea," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at her. Sabrina scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with shock. "Excuse me?" "She told me to do it," Ethan yelled, sweat beading on his forehead. "She is the one who said Dad was losing it. She is the one who said we needed to get control of the assets before he squandered them. I just wanted to protect the estate." "You liar!" Sabrina shrieked. "You came to me. You said you needed liquidity by the end of the quarter." "I needed liquidity because the market crashed," Ethan roared back, losing all sense of self-preservation. "I had a margin call. I had to plug the hole in the account, or I was going to lose my license. I borrowed the money from Dad with the intention of paying it back." The room went deadly silent again. Even Sabrina stopped shouting. Ethan stood there, chest heaving, realizing too late what he had just said. He had just admitted, in front of a police officer and 2 witnesses, that he had used his father's funds to cover his own personal investment losses. That was not protecting the estate. That was embezzlement. That was fraud. Officer Miller finished writing in his notebook. He looked up, his face impassive. "Mr. Dalton," he said calmly, "I would remind you that you have been cautioned that anything you say can be used as evidence. You just admitted to misappropriating funds." Ethan's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. He looked at me, then at Dad, then at the floor. He collapsed into the nearest chair, putting his head in his hands. He was finished. Olivia stepped forward, closing the distance to Sabrina. "Mrs. Cole," Olivia said, her tone icy. "Here is the situation. We have the video of the assault. We have the toxicology report. We have the witness statements. Officer Miller has enough probable cause to arrest you right now for domestic battery and elder abuse." Sabrina opened her mouth to argue, but Olivia cut her off. "However," Olivia continued, "it is Christmas Day, and frankly, Mr. Dalton has been through enough trauma for one evening, so I am going to offer you a choice. You can leave this house right now, voluntarily. You will pack a bag, you will hand over your keys, and you will go. If you do that, we will file for the restraining order in the morning, and the police will come to serve you at your motel." Olivia leaned in closer. "Or, Officer Miller can cuff you in front of your stepchildren and drag you out to the squad car. It is entirely up to you." Sabrina looked around the room. She looked at Ethan, broken and silent in the chair. She looked at Lauren, who was glaring at her with hatred. She looked at Dad, who was staring out the window, refusing to acknowledge her existence. And finally, she looked at me. She saw the bruise she had put on my face, but she also saw the victory in my eyes. She realized that the pathetic, sentimental girl she had mocked had just systematically dismantled her entire life. She straightened her spine, she smoothed her dress. She tried to summon some shred of dignity, but it was gone. "I will leave," she spat. She grabbed her purse from the table. She did not go upstairs to pack. She knew she had lost the right to comfort. She walked to the front door, her heels clicking on the hardwood, a sound that used to make me anxious, but now sounded like a retreat. She paused at the door. She turned back to me. Her face was a mask of pure venom. "You think you have won," she hissed. "You will regret this. You have no idea what you have done." I looked at her calmly. "I know exactly what I have done," I said. "I took out the trash." She stared at me for 1 second longer, hatred radiating off her like heat, and then she turned and walked out. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The sound echoed through the house, followed by the frantic jingling of the wind chimes on the porch as she stormed into the night. The silence that followed was different. It was not heavy. It was not oppressive. It was the silence of a battlefield after the cannons have stopped firing. Officer Miller spoke quietly to Olivia, confirming that he would file the report and that a detective would be in touch regarding the fraud investigation. He nodded to us and left. Olivia packed up her laptop. She walked over to me and squeezed my arm. "I will be in touch tomorrow," she said softly. "Try to get some sleep. Emery, you did good." Doctor Hall checked Dad's pulse one last time, gave me a reassuring nod, and followed Olivia out. The door clicked shut. It was just us, me, Dad, Lauren, and Ethan, who was still sitting with his head in his hands, staring at the ruin of his career. David quietly brought the kids down from upstairs. He saw the mood in the room, saw Ethan's posture, saw Sabrina's absence, and understood. He took Lauren's hand. "We should go to the hotel," he said gently. "Let's give them some space." Lauren nodded. She hugged me again, holding on tight. "We will fix this," she whispered. "I promise." She took the kids, who were quiet and wide-eyed, and led them out. Ethan stood up like a zombie. He did not look at anyone. He walked out into the snow without a coat, a man walking into a winter of his own making. And then there were two. The house was quiet. The only sounds were the crackling of the logs in the fireplace and the distant, rhythmic crashing of the waves against the cliffs below. I walked over to the dining table and began to clear the plates. It was a reflex, a need to do something normal in a world that had gone mad. My hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was leaving my system. "Emery." Dad's voice was soft. I stopped. I put down the stack of plates. I walked over to his chair. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The fight had taken a toll, but his eyes were present. They were sad, incredibly sad, but they were his. He reached out a hand. I took it. His skin was dry, his grip weak, but he held on to me as if I were the only solid thing in the universe. He pulled me closer, until I was kneeling beside his chair, my head resting on the armrest, just like I used to do when I was a little girl watching him grade papers. "I am so sorry, Emmy," he whispered. His voice cracked. I shook my head against the leather. "You don't have to apologize. Dad, they tricked you. It wasn't your fault." "No," he said firmly. He lifted his hand and touched my hair. "I sat here," he said, his voice trembling with the weight of his confession, even through the fog, even with the pills. "I saw things. I saw how she looked at you. I saw how tired you were. And I just sat here. I let you carry it all because I was too weak to fight them." He took a breath, fighting back tears. "I watched them hurt you," he said. "I watched them treat you like a servant in your own home. I watched." He squeezed my hand. "But I am not watching anymore," he said. "I promise you, from now on, I am looking right at you, and I am not looking away again." It was the symmetry of it that broke me. Dad just watched. That had been the headline of my nightmare for months, and now he was awake. The dam finally broke. I started to cry. It was not a polite cry. It was a messy, gasping release of 18 months of fear, isolation, and anger. I buried my face in his cardigan, smelling the faint scent of tobacco and old wool, and I sobbed. I cried for the career I had put on hold. I cried for the mother I missed. I cried for the brother and sister I had lost to greed. Dad held me. He did not shush me. He just held me, rocking slightly, humming a tune he used to sing when I was a baby. The front door opened quietly. I tensed, thinking it was Sabrina coming back. But it was Lauren. She had come back from the car. She walked into the living room, saw us huddled together, and without a word, she dropped to her knees beside me. She wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. We stayed like that for a long time. 3 broken people on a rug in a living room that smelled of stale wine and pine needles. We were not fixed. The lawsuit would take months. Ethan was likely going to prison. The money was a mess. The scars on this family would probably never fully heal. But as I looked up, through my tears, I saw the Christmas tree in the corner, not the giant, gaudy monstrosity Sabrina had erected, but on the side table, almost hidden in the shadows, was a small ceramic tree with plastic bulbs that lit up when you plugged it in. I had brought it down from the attic yesterday. It was Mom's. It was glowing softly in the dark room. I looked at the window. Outside, the wind was still howling, battering the house, but inside, the fire was warm. The camera on the shelf was still blinking, a silent sentinel that had done its job. Ethan had screamed that I ruined Christmas. He was wrong. I hadn't ruined it. I had burned down the lie they had built around us so that the truth could finally breathe. I touched my bruised cheek, felt the warmth of my father's hand and the weight of my sister's arm, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the morning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to hear from you. Please comment down below telling me where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people. Stay safe, and see you in the next one.